Hey everybody, Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show with our episode featuring James Galliano, who is a retired FBI agent, a former Army officer, a West Point grad. Now he teaches school at St. John's and is also a PhD candidate. And you for sure have seen his writing in a variety of publications talking about the FBI and analysis in that field, whether it's being critical of James Comey or talking about specific cases. He's also a commentator on CNN as well. So you for sure, if you watch CNN, you've seen him give his expert opinion on a variety of things. Now, look, we get into a fantastic conversation like very few people can, and we apparently see the world in a very similar way. So I think you will enjoy. Look, James can talk. He talks for a living, and I think you'll enjoy this conversation because we get in, we get fast, we get to work, and provide quite a bit of commentary and critique. Okay, if you want to support the show, which hopefully you do, and if you're new here, check it out. A new show is 5 days a week on a variety of topics. Today is James Galliano. There'll be something on health and fitness later in the week, and there'll be music. And oh my gosh, we've got a really huge guest. Everything seems to be lined up, and we're going to get the lead singer from Clutch on the show. So we have all kinds of fantastic things coming up, and we'll continue to do that. So here's how you support the show. You can buy the shirts at breakitdownshow.com. You can subscribe on YouTube, on, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, we're there. So do a rating and a review. That really helps out. If you can lift up the messages when we post them and tell your friends about it, that's how you support the show. Okay, enough about that. You know what I'm going to say next. Here's where we talk about the charity work that we do here. We talk about Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. If you want to help us help veterans with PTSD, like myself, I'm actually having a pretty bad day today. Right? It's things like Save the Brave and the events that we put on that help give veterans community and give us purpose. That's what you're doing when you're contributing to these things. Now, if that's not your thing, but you do want to help with charity and you want to do something for someone special, give them a Charity on Top gift card. Go to CharityOnTop.org. You give a gift card, like let's say, hey, I'm going to give Pete $50. I don't care what he uses it for, whatever charity he wants. So you send me a $50 gift card. Now I can give it to 1.8 different million charities here in the United States. Anybody can give charity. You can always give it as a gift or even as something on top, $5. Who cares? Give that extra something to someone and really make a difference in your life, and do that at CharityOnTop.org. All right, here comes James Galliano.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland. This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is James Galliano, and you are listening to the Break It Down Show.
I have to remember the soft G's sometimes in play in Italian. So,
Dude, I grew up in the deep South. Do you think I ever could worry about that soft G? I answered to anything and everything in the 1970s in the deep South. So
yeah,
we're good.
Extra vowels like Gagliano.
Right. Oh, you wouldn't believe some of the bastardized versions of my name, but it's all good.
It is all good. And as Army guys, we've all been called, your name is actually hard a little bit because there's different ways to say it. But Turner, I was called Tucker, Taylor, Tyler. Like you guys aren't even trying. All you have to do is look at my name. You can't act like it's hard. But they got it wrong all the time. All the time.
Absolutely. Yep.
So James is on, and look, if you guys don't already know who James is, do a Bing search and he'll come up, and you can look at his commentary on CNN. He's written all over in all the publications. He's a 25-year FBI guy who dealt with crime and murder and gangs and all of that stuff in Newburgh, New York. He also is a former Army Ranger, a academy grad, obviously someone who is well seasoned and steeped. But it's funny because all of these great American hero qualities that you possess, your family, having a legacy of service and everything, and you just can't stop running your mouth. That's what you do the best, I think.
Yeah, I think, for me to be able to find a niche, I spent 33 years in the military and in law enforcement. When you combine my academy time, my regular Army time, and obviously you mentioned the 25 years in the FBI, 33 years of doing that. And how was I ever going to parlay that into into an opportunity post FBI, post government service, where I get an opportunity to talk for a living, and it truly is a blessing. I mean, I think communication is such an important and undersold part of the human condition. I think how we communicate, how we say things, what we decide to talk about is absolutely so critically important. And brother, I am blessed for opportunities just like this to talk and to communicate with people and try to find some type of common ground on polarizing issues.
Yeah, boy, we are so polarized right now. It's incredible. And one of the things, as I went through and I looked at your stuff, I think guys like us, maybe you lean a little right, maybe you lean a little left, but there's like a rooting that's really right down the middle with folks like us, because you've seen what hard living looks like. You worked in Newburgh, where it was the murder capital of the nation for a while, for being a small town. So you've seen what true adversity looks like. Not that regular adversity isn't there, but it gives you a voice that's uncommon, and it does provide that context, because we can get lost on our own little side of things and not realize, hey, all you got to do is flip the camera around and things get really different.
Yeah, I think, that's the misnomer. We live in this country now, actually this world, where everything's a binary choice.
Yeah.
You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. You're either for police or, you hate police. And my thing is, I am a law and order guy. I absolutely, admit to and hew to the conservative side of things. But I also have a human component and an ability to look at things and say, hey, sometimes when you're looking at causality, it's not as easy as, and I hate to use it, black and white, but it's not as easy or simple as black and white or the binary choice. You do have to look at things from the causality perspective and say, hey, listen, some of us in this country have been blessed. We started out on first or second base, some people on third base. Other people started in the dugout and had to scramble just to get up to at bat. I appreciate that. I try to make sure that any of my law enforcement analysis is as you use the word, steeped in that. But again, I am generally a law and order type of guy. I believe in a country that has the rule of law. It's important. We walk down the street and we appreciate the fact that in this country, there are laws and we have to adhere to them and hew to them in a polite society. But I also try to see the other side too. And I think that's important in any type of discussion.
Yeah, because ultimately you look around, and when people complain about the 1%, I always encourage them to scope the camera back a little bit and take a look around. And if you're in the United States, boy, let me tell you something, you're doing pretty good. For those that don't know, we poop in potable water, so things are pretty good around here. And we can lose sight of that too. Like, turn the camera around, but also back it up some and take a look around. There are so many things that do seem to divide us, and the FBI is wonderful in that you can't just kidnap people in the U.S. anymore. That's not a viable profession for a criminal. In a lot of the world, it is viable. So, I mean, God bless you guys for doing all that stuff and helping take care of that. But there is a tarnishing, as a counterintelligence guy, and I don't want to go down the whole road. I just want to kind of touch on this as an example. When Director Comey comes out and says that, Secretary Clinton, it was cool that she had TSSCI on her home server. I struggled to take the Bureau as a whole seriously, and you understand why.
100%. And yeah, you raise a good point here. Again, I think as I've gotten older, you go to West Point and you learn duty, honor, country. You learn everything is black and white, right? There's right, there's wrong, there's honor, there's dishonor. And unfortunately, one of the things I think as a young 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kid, learning that ethos, which is so critical and so important for young military leaders to learn, the world is far more made up of shades of gray than it is stark black and whites. And you highlighted two of them. If you mention Donald Trump for an example, or as you just did, James Comey or Hillary Clinton, people have a stark, reaction to that. There's right. I haven't formed an opinion yet. There's, yes or no. There's hate them or love them. And I always say this because I served in the FBI for 25 years. The FBI has been around since 1908. In all of that time, and think about that, 100 and, almost 120 years, in all of that time of the FBI, there have only been 8 formal Senate-approved FBI directors, right? There's only been 8 of them. I served under 4 of them. The last one was James Comey. I appreciated James Comey when he was the FBI director. Look, I didn't like the fact that he wore non-white standard button-down shirts with rep ties and dark suits and cap-toe shoes. I didn't like the fact that he was pushing against what the traditional J. Edgar Hoover vision of the FBI was. But I also appreciated the fact that he looked at some really tough topics, like how inner city communities, and we'll say, communities of color and their relationships with law enforcement have turned to where they are now, say in 2014, 2015, after Trayvon Martin and the Michael Brown shooting and all these different things. And I appreciate the fact that he had the cojones to put his finger and touch the third rail of law enforcement, which is dealing with this imperfect relationship we have with communities of color. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
However, my caveat to that is James Comey also did some things, because we're all flawed, complex human beings. The fact that there were 8 or 9 different instances where he had interactions with, the president-elect and the president, once President Trump became our 45th president, where I thought a 6'8" imposing figure, a man who's the leader of the premier law enforcement agency, not in the country, but in the world, should have pushed back and should have said, "Sir, I disagree with that," or "Sir, what are you asking me to do?" And he meekly, he did as little as possible to get out of the situation, and then waited until later to leak documents to the New York Times, not even by himself. He did it through a surrogate, which made it even one more step removed from having some courage. And that part of it, look, I'm disappointed. I've been as you pointed out, I've been very critical on social media. I've been very critical in op-ed columns, but we're all flawed human beings. We're all complex individuals. And I look at somebody like James Comey and say, gosh, he did some good things, but damn, there's some things about him that I don't respect. And I think that pretty much colors all of us, brother.
I think it's a great example. I try to think about that too, in that, like, okay, so love or hate Donald Trump, he's not a binary outcome. There is good, and if you can't accept the good that he does, then you're the bigger problem. Like, we have to look at these things with a more rational sense. And I'm prepared to be wrong, because I have been a zillion times. I am prepared to be a hypocrite with the things that I say, and to absolutely contradict myself at all times. And I can't disallow that to anybody else. And also, just about everybody is trying to do their best in that moment, for the most part. And that's sort of my trust in humanity. And, whether they've done, the worst thing possible, they've taken someone else's life on purpose, it doesn't mean they're a wholly evil person. We have to allow some balancing of the scale. Even if it goes down to the heavy side on evil, there is some good there that we have to be able to recognize and see. Otherwise, we're just not doing it well.
Yeah, I come down on that issue the same way you do. I do believe that mankind is inherently good. Yet I also, as you acknowledge, recognize that there's some people that just don't want to play nice in the sandbox, and some people that have to be incapacitated by putting them away and incarcerating them. But I'll tell you what, I watched, we're all in quarantine right now. So My wife's like, you got to get off of Netflix, because it's like I sit down and I become glued to the TV like a little kid. And I recently watched, I can't remember the name of the documentary, but it was about the Bard Prison Initiative, the BPI. My mind was blown. What they did was, in upstate New York, they sent professors from Bard University, from Bard College in New York, up to these universities, one to a female prison, a number of them to different male prisons. And they carefully hand-selected inmates that they felt were, even if they had they'd gone to jail for horrific crimes, murder, assaults, rapes, but inmates that had been incarcerated that had shown that they were attempting to become rehabilitated. They gave them the opportunity to get an associate's degree and then to work towards a bachelor's degree. I was fascinated. And look, I would love, I teach at St. John's University. I'm working towards my doctorate there, but I would love to have become part of that program. They require you, I think, in most instances, to have a terminal degree, and I'm just not there yet. But the opportunity to go into a prison and to sit down with 15 or 20 inmates, and you hear these guys, you would think you were just in a regular college classroom with, yes, they're older than the average college student, But the questions and the debates that were going on, the discourse that was going on, it goes back to the point you made earlier about we lose out on that rehabilitation piece. And there's people that complain and say, I don't want my tax dollars being wasted on inmates, having back rubs and massages and getting to go to school. But when those men do get out, and like you pointed out, the vast majority of them, there's an expiration date for their prison sentence. They're going to get out. Would you rather they get out, have a degree, and become a productive member of society? Would you rather them come back and go straight back to the corner and revert back to hustling because they can't get a job anywhere else?
Yeah, how many trap doors do you want under those guys? They've already proven that they'll go the ultimate length. We were talking about the Prison Chronicles off mic before we got started, but this is a good transition into something that's really more valuable than talking about the political side of things, because we aren't great at prisons. One of the doctors that's on the Prison Chronicles, she talks about how, I asked her the question, do we incarcerate too many people? And she said, by far. We're just entirely too many people that go to jail, and some of them need it, but not because they're criminals, because there's the mental health problem that comes into this whole thing. And then the other side of it is as we run people through these programs, one of the programs we detailed is Advanced Peace. It's Devone Bogan's program, where they invite, the most violent 25 guys in a county, and they go, let's run you through this, basically a case management thing. Like, we're sorry we left you behind. And when you flip the camera around and you look at those guys looking at Devone or looking at society, one of the guys in the show says, prison was an extension of my community. That's not what I want as an American.
Yeah. What we've got to be careful about, and it's something you pointed out, Newburgh, where I worked for a number of years, mostly from 2008 to 2012 in combating the violent street gangs, the Bloods and the Latin Kings that were at war with each other. And they weren't only killing themselves, but innocent people were getting killed in the crossfire, which all of a sudden made it an issue that people stood up and took notice of. But we talk about restorative justice. And again, it goes back to corrections. What is the purpose of corrections? It's incapacitation, it's deterrence, it's punitive, it's rehabilitative if it's done the right way. The other part is restorative. Yes, victims deserve restitution or restoration. You can't bring a person back that some inmate is killed, but what can you do to make that life that is now, that second life that now goes to jail for a long period of time, how do you then make that a productive life? Yes, the worst of the worst that are never going to get out, we understand that some people, it's a small percentage, but they have to be incarcerated. But the ones that do get out, to your point, and it's the vast majority of them, what are they able to do in society and for society? And if they don't have any skills, if they don't have any knowledge or tools, then they just revert back to what they know. And that's the problem. We've got to, before the coronavirus, we had a bustling economy. We have, jobs that were all over being developed and opportunities being out there. But the problem is, if you're a felon, if you're a convicted felon, you lose rights. And when you come out and you have to be honest on a job application and say, hey, I just did a 25-year bid on rape or murder or whatever, it makes it really difficult to get rehired. So then what are we doing? And again, I'm not pretending to have the answers to that. I'm not pretending to think that I know how to fix that, but that's something that talking about it and getting bright minds together, it's something we got to address, because you're right. We do have an incarceration problem. And I'm not suggesting that people that are in jail don't deserve to be there.
Of course.
But why is it in a developed nation like ours that is so wealthy and so, industrialized and so, the envy of the world, the best military, the best this, the best economy? Why can't we put minds together, great minds, to come up with some way to fix that problem?
Yeah. There's a book behind you on your shelf by Mario Puzo that talks about non-traditional government, and not that is the way to go, but there are other ways that countries do this. There's, fine penal systems in half of the countries around the world. They don't exist. They handle it through civil law. Penal systems just are very expensive. And as we're seeing in our country, they're problematic. And as much as I'm pretty hard on the prison industrial complex, we created the problem of not being able to house enough of our own people, and we needed to contract it out.
Yeah. And again, there's another one that, I wish I had an answer to. And I kind of compare, you refer to the prison industrial complex, which is very congruous with the military industrial complex. And I was a young, infantry lieutenant during the Cold War, stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia, and Fort Drum, New York. This is right around the time in the height of the Cold War, where the military began to outsource particular jobs that they didn't want to, even during the Reagan, military buildup. Our cooks and our mail clerks and people that worked at the clinic, a lot of them they used to be military positions, and then they became civilian positions. Once we went to war in 2001, once the global war on terror began after we were attacked on 9/11, my gosh, my periods of time in Afghanistan, I was there 3 separate times on short tours, not 13-month-long tours, 2 or 3 months at a time. My experiences there were all the jobs that were done, by logisticians and people behind the scenes. Because remember, for every infantryman in a foxhole, there's 9 people supporting them that are delivering the mail, being faith leaders, being attorneys, being artillerymen, all those different things. But the military it began to outsource so much of it. That obviously caused problems, because you look at it from the contractor perspective. We were paying guys huge sums of money to come and do different things that the military should have done, but we just didn't have the resources to do it. That's reality.
Yeah.
It's not just on the prison side, but it's also the reality on the military side. How do we address that? The part where it becomes civilianized, and I just made that word up, but where we're using more and more civilians to handle things that experts and professionals in the field have always handled.
Yeah, and sometimes rightfully so. Sometimes you need that seasoned warrant officer who knows how to run that piece of equipment and how to fix it. You need an expert there. And so in some cases that makes sense. We can have retired guys deal with the mail, like that makes a lot of sense. But there's far too many people that are doing far too much. If we're going to go abroad and we're going to do these things, we've got to do a better job of taking care of all the people that go. And maybe being a little less willing to go all the time. You, am I right in this? You stood on the deck of the USS Cole after it was blown up?
So you remember, this is back in December of 2000, and I was still a member of the FBI's hostage rescue team. That's the counterterror unit that, basically was stood up in 1983 because the government, we had just gotten the 84 Olympics, to be delivered to Los Angeles. And the U.S. government realized we didn't have a mechanism in place. God forbid if something happened like the 1972 Olympics in Munich, where, kidnappings and hostage takings or any type of, critical incident, it's very difficult to suspend posse comitatus and have the U.S. military perform law enforcement function.
Yes.
So that was the creation of the FBI's hostage rescue team. So when in December of 2000, when Al-Qaeda terrorists attacked the USS Cole in the Gulf of Aden, I was a shooter on the hostage rescue team, a member of Echo Team Blue Assault. We went wheels up at Andrews Air Force Base right away and got sent there to secure the ship. And your listeners are thinking, what the heck has the FBI got to do with an American warship that gets attacked by terrorists? But that warship is U.S. soil, even if it is in, someone else's territorial waters, just like an embassy. The German embassy in Manhattan, that footprint belongs to Germany. A U.S. embassy in Tanzania or in Nairobi, it's U.S. soil, and so was this warship. So we secured the ship, and then obviously once all the wounded were taken off and sent to medical facilities in Landstuhl in Germany, when the FBI investigators came in to figure out what happened, who was behind it, we provided security for them in Yemen. So that was I don't want to say it was my first introduction to the Middle East back in 2000. I'd been there before, but that was where I spent the most time.
I want to take a real quick aside too, because you're bringing up an important point that's topical, and that's why I want to take this real quick jaunt real quick. But you talked about, the challenges of putting military people to work inside the U.S. When we look at all of the crazy responses to this pandemic going on, getting the National Guard out in the streets, to put the National Guard and bullets and guns into the same immediate location, very, very tough. Most of the time, the Guard is going to create capacity. They're a man-hour uplift that an emergency manager turns on to help a governor accomplish filling sandbags or whatever it's going to be. Will you speak a little bit to like what happens when the Guard does deploy in times of crisis and how it's not a military suppression of freedom?
Sure. I think, for some of your older listeners, and I know you have an age demographic that covers a wide spectrum, but for some of your older listeners, they'll remember Kent State and what happened when the National Guard was sent there to quell some of the student riots that were going on during the height of the Vietnam War. And a lot of times these National Guard soldiers, they were, I don't want to say untrained, but let's just say they were less trained than active duty troops are, obviously. A lot of the National Guard today, they have seen multiple combat tours. These aren't, shake and bakes, as we would say in the military, people that, okay, I'm going to make you a captain or I'm going to make you a staff sergeant. These are people that have seen combat. Now, the mission here is very different. I mean, the mission here is, to help distribute surgical masks, to help make sure that ventilators get to the right place, to help make sure that, God forbid, and I hate to use this term because their heads will explode when I say martial law, but God forbid martial law ever had to be established where you had to put troops out there to say, you cannot be on the street. Look at us. We're not doing this in person. You're in your home, a long way away from me inside my home. And I understand this is how podcasts work, but this is how a lot of the news media works right now. This is how a lot of businesses are working. This is our new reality right now. And I'm kind of ashamed to say that as, the FBI's New York City crisis management coordinator for a number of years back in the early aughts, pandemic was a tiny appendices on the back of my crisis response plan, because when is that ever going to happen? I'm focused on Al Qaeda. I'm focused on Hurricane Katrina. I'm focused on things that, and you'll appreciate this as a military guy, generals are always accused of fighting the last war. I can handle Al Qaeda. I can handle, Hurricane Katrina. Those are things we dealt with and we've got a lot of institutional knowledge on. But when it comes to a pandemic, people's heads are exploding. We don't know how to deal with this because it's something different. How the National Guard gets used, I think until martial law, and I'm not suggesting anyone who said martial law is going to be imposed, but until and unless martial law gets imposed where you would have to have the National Guard out, I think right now it is in a support role. It is in a help to distribute supplies. It is to help, do anything that a state governor requires them to do, but it's not in a law enforcement, a military, or a martial law imposed type of response.
Yeah. And that was just a quick aside. I want to get back to looking at conflict and crime, across the decades. We're going to have Clint Hill on. Clint Hill was the Secret Service guy that jumps on the back of the Kennedy limousine moments after the president was shot. So in this guy's still around. Like his lifetime, he's seen, Korean War, Vietnam War, all of the political based assassinations in the 60s, both Kennedy brothers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And then, we have the 70s. You very clearly from your high school days remember the incident in Tehran when, we lost our embassy and just all of this struggle and strife. Yet somehow we have this sense that this is the most cataclysmic, damaging time in U.S. history. I don't see it. I don't get it, Dan. Help me understand.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take off my law enforcement analyst cap for a second. I'm gonna put on my military history professor cap here. I think that's how we're conditioned as Americans, and I think I learned this early on, even before 9/11. But let's go back to the Marine Corps barracks bombings over in the Middle East and things like that happened back during the late 70s and early 80s. The hijackings that took place. I think for Americans, we often there's a great saying that, when you're dealing with committed jihadists, and just to use them as an example, they don't think in terms of day to day. They think in terms of generations. Americans can't see past the end of their nose. We're concerned about what is going to be on Netflix tomorrow night or what's going on down at the yacht club next Thursday. We don't see and sense things generationally the same way that people that live in austere environments, parts of the world, poor people, folks like, somebody that's going to fight for the Northern Alliance or for the Taliban in Afghanistan or for Al Qaeda or for ISIS, they don't have a lot. They don't have a lot of possessions and worldly goods, but they think in long-term projections that Americans aren't built to do so. Now, having said that, as we look backwards, and you pointed it out, the political assassinations in the 60s, the unrest we had in the 70s, some of the riots in the early 70s, the 68 Democratic Convention, you talk about the things that happened. Hell, it wasn't that long ago that half of our country went to war against the other half of our country, and 600,000 people were killed, 1.5 million casualties. And back then we didn't have 330 million people in this country. It was a much smaller country. It was a huge part of our country that was ripped asunder. So I agree with you. Look, I'm not old enough to remember the civil rights movement. I was born in 1965. But look, in 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. In 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed. People got murdered. People got beaten on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Things happened that we look at it now and we go, okay, we're upset right now because some people like Trump, some people don't like Trump, some people like Clinton, some people like Biden. But I look at it the way you do. I put it into perspective and say, as tough as times are right now, this country has obliterated the scourge of slavery. It took a while, but we did it. They've gone after fascism back in the 30s and the 40s against Hitler and the Axis powers. They have done all kinds of good things in this world and dealt with things that at the time people thought it was not just an existential threat, but that America would dissolve and come apart at the seams. We survived it and came out stronger. And I look at this the same way. Yes, we're muddling around right now. Yes, we're making some mistakes. Yes, there are unfortunately some casualties that people we can never bring back due to this. But I think we'll be stronger united when we come together.
Yeah, I agree. I think the nation is going, consistently in the right direction, trying to do greater things. And like people, we've got our good and our bad. We do some things really well, other things really poorly. And just to illustrate, and I know I say this a lot on the show, but it just always shocks the shit out of me when I think about it. President John Tyler died in the 1860s as an old man. He was born in the 1700s. He has grandkids that are still alive. Not great-grandkids, grandkids. So that's how young our 3 generations would take us back to the beginning of our country. I mean, that's how new we are as a country. And when we look at the block of time, like when you came of age, the very late 70s to the mid 80s, German disco bombings, Beirut barracks. Also, the station chief Buckley in Beirut gets snatched up and tortured and killed. John Lennon is assassinated. The president is shot. All this stuff in Tehran. Jim Jones. All of these crazy things that were in our zeitgeist, in our immediate vicinity. And it seems like you take that snapshot, you're like, holy shit, that's a terrible time. We had a gas shortage during that time, where we had gas rationings of gas. We haven't had things rationed in forever, where you, like odd license plate, even license plate are the days you could go get fuel in California. So yeah, we all need to calm down a little bit and focus where we think the work is.
Yeah, I think, and you just and just so your listeners know, you and I have never spoken before.
No,
but
never,
I feel
ever.
like
Hey, this is A Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
the planet is 4.5 billion with a B years old. First man did not stand upright and stride across the plains until 200,000 years ago. Civilization has only been around for what, 4,000, 5,000, maybe 6,000 years?
Yeah.
The United States is 244 years old. That's not a drop in the bucket.
Right.
That's like that's a molecule in the bucket when you look at the world and world history and how long European peoples and African peoples and Middle Eastern peoples, the cradle of civilization, how long they've been around. And I think sometimes that people don't realize that this experiment, and we are living in an experiment, this experiment that we are enjoying and prospering in and living in, it's fragile. And it's been here a microscopic amount of time when you put it into the context of the planet and civilization and mankind and other countries. And we need to cherish that because, it's been said before, in one generation, it could be gone. We need to cherish it and fight for it. And I don't care whether you hew to the left, you hew to the right, you're blue, you're red, you're D, you're R. The bottom line is this is ours. This is our thing. And we need to protect it, respect it, and appreciate it.
When I look at our last, we'll say 3 of our last 4 presidential candidates, they've all either been investigated for significant crimes. Why aren't we getting better people, man? Like, I'm sure, you growing up in the Army and the FBI, you must have met some incredible people that can handle the job. I think if he would ever take General Mattis has the capability, this job is bigger than any one person. But if someone can handle it, it's someone like a Jim Mattis, someone like, I don't know, there's a lot of people out there. Why aren't we able to encourage these folks and then pick them? People who actually could have a chance at the job.
Didn't Winston Churchill famously say one time that, in a democracy, you deserve what you get because you choose and you elect who your elected officials are, the people that rule you, if you were. And I'm using air quotes right now on a podcast, which no one will see, but I'm describing what I'm doing. But, that's a democracy. I look at it and every human being, Shakespeare had it right. We're all walking around in our own Greek tragedy, right? We're all full of hubris. We're all full of that fatal flaw, that character flaw that every one of his main protagonists had. And I think that's the case with politicians. To become a politician, you have to be a number of things. You've got to be self-absorbed. You've got to be an egocentric. You've got to be, all these things that we look at in polite society and say, well, those aren't really things that we want. But the bottom line is when you're looking at a leader from a West Point perspective or from a, as I would view a leader, it comes down to the 4 C's. Character, competence, charisma, and courage. And courage doesn't just mean, are you the guy that's going to run through the breach or, lay down on the barbed wire so that the rest of your team can run over it and go accomplish the mission, but the courage to stand up to people, the courage to do what's right, the courage to protect the least amongst us, the courage to say, hey, that's not right. And even though it's going to hurt me politically, I'm not going to go for that. So, you look at and you talk about our recent future, look, I go back to, Reagan, who's my patron saint, and there's a picture of him in my garage. I'm a Michael J. Fox, Alex Keaton, from the TV show, worshiper of Reagan. But even so, going forward, Reagan with, the Iran-Contra, every single president, before him, there's only been 45 of them in our 244-year history. And after him, they all have flaws. And I just think that when we're going to have human beings lead us, when you don't make a machine that we can make perfect, even if that exists on that side, they're going to have flaws. Whether you're looking at Reagan, you're looking at, Bush 41, you're looking at Clinton, you're looking at Bush 43, you're looking at Obama, and now certainly you're looking at Trump. These are flawed human beings, but they're human beings. And to expect that you're going to get one that is going to be perfect and that's going to get 100% favorability ratings and do everything right doesn't exist.
Yeah, it doesn't exist. And we've also shown that our sense of a president in the time is often dramatically different than how history views him. And Truman is a great example of that.
Well, and again, you and I didn't talk about the fact that we were going to talk about presidential history, but I'm happy to dive into this. I say all the time, so Truman was a guy who became president when FDR died right toward the end of World War II. And Truman was left making a huge decision that I don't know if a lot of people would have the stomach, the cojones, whatever you want to call it, to make, whether or not to use atomic bombs and drop them on Imperial Japan in order to bring the war to an end. And he did that. And that is just an amazing, amazing thing that he did. He was the 33rd president. He was the guy that came up with the great line, the buck stops here, which means, hey, don't pass the buck and ask somebody else to take responsibilities with you. And here's something that really endears him to me, and as a guy that I don't think gets enough credit. Executive Order 9981 which desegregated the United States military in 1948.
Yeah.
I think that doesn't get enough play. When you look at it and you say, how many years later was it, 1964, that the Civil Rights Act passed? The military, which is considered a conservative bastion, was really progressive in that realm, that in 1948, he said, guess what? There are not going to be Negro troops and white troops. There are going to be troops. And man, that was huge at that time, 1948. So hats off to Harry Truman. I don't think he gets the respect that he deserves, bro.
Yeah. Well, all right. So he also invented Israel, gets the advice of everybody. And that's proven to be, I think, a good decision, but man, an expensive one.
It has. And look, I understand there's people that have obviously feelings, as they should, for, Palestinians and the difficult position that they're in. But my God, Israel is literally, and this is coming from a guy that has been all across the Middle East during my career. Israel is one place that is unequivocally a supporter, an ally, and I say ally with a capital A, of the United States. Yes, you can disagree with their politics. Yes, you can disagree with this prime minister or that prime minister. Yes, you can disagree with a whole host of things from the political side, but they are a true ally and they deserve our support. And I hope that never changes. I hope that no American administration ever changes that relationship.
Do you think we should recognize Palestine as a nation, since most of the rest of the world does?
Boy, you didn't tell me we were going here, but if we're going here, look, I'm a guy that believes in a two-state solution. I do. And I know that people hear that and they're like, well, that's just nebulous, amorphous, two-state. What does that truly mean? I mean, I believe that the Palestinians should self-govern. I don't think the PLO is the answer. I think that they should self-govern. I think they should be recognized as a state when they denounce terrorism and they no longer, promote the fact that you've got people that are sending their young kids to blow themselves up in markets in Israel so that they can have their 52 virgins and that their family can get a small stipend, 1,000 rubles or whatever the pay is, drachmas or whatever it is over there, to support them because they gave up a son or a daughter as a quote unquote martyr. It's a difficult situation. Many presidents from both sides of the aisle have tried to make that happen. And it just seems like it's one of those things that it's unfixable, but I refuse to believe that. It can be done and it will be done. Hopefully, brother, it's in our lifetime.
Yeah, hopefully. I hope so. Yeah, and it's probably not fixable, but I think it requires management and attention. And, apparently we're the country that does that kind of thing for the rest of the world for some reason. Let's get past that stuff. Let's, if we were going to talk to young officer candidate Jim Gagliano and say, hey, one day, many years from now, you're going to get a PhD. What's that guy say? Because didn't you graduate in the bottom fifth of your class or bottom 10% of your class?
Boy, you did your research, didn't you? Well,
I did.
You're off by just a little bit. It wasn't the bottom 10%. It was the bottom 5%. But I will say this. I grew up and I'm not look, if I would ever, explain away my academic deficiencies as a young man, I could never blame my parents. My father graduated in the top 5% of his West Point class in 1960. I grew up on the east side of Atlanta, and it wasn't poor. It was lower middle class part of Atlanta that had transitioned in the late 60s. And it was a place where African Americans that had moved out of the city limits themselves and out to the quote unquote suburbs, even though we were 10 miles from downtown Atlanta.
Right.
I grew up in a relatively poor school district. A lot of kids didn't leave there achieving things. No excuses. And it's something when I talk to young men and young women today, I'm like, look, you can't give an excuse to me. I mean, I had two parents, and yes, not everybody's blessed with that. And they cared. They broke a boot off in my ass to make sure I was doing homework and doing the right things. But it doesn't matter what school district you came from, or you don't have new books or this, that, and the other. You can achieve things. Look, when I got to West Point, I'd love to be able to blame it on the school system I came out of. And it was a good school system. I mean, it still is, even though a number of years ago it went under state oversight and it lost its accreditation. But the teachers there were doing the right things and working as hard as they could. And the students there, I mean, I'm blessed to have gone there. but I just didn't work hard enough. And when I got to West Point, I thought I was working hard and I wasn't. So when I graduated, I really didn't start taking things seriously. All I wanted to do was get out in the Army, and I thought we were going to go to war with the Soviet Union, and I wanted to be on the front lines of that. I look at things a little differently now, and I think that happens once you have children and once you're an adult and once you get married, and then all of a sudden you realize, you know what? There's more to do than, just I'm not going to mess with this homework stuff. So yeah, I don't think if you go back and talk to people in my high school and you said, hey, Jimmy Galliano is working on his doctorate right now, what do you think about that? I think that once they pick the phone back up after falling on the ground and laughing their you-know-what's off, then they'd go, no, not that guy. But no, here I am, man. It's just it's why our country is great. It's like if you work hard, I truly believe this, there is, even if there's impediments and obstacles and it's not fair for everybody and we all don't start off on the same base, but if you're willing to work hard, there's nothing in this country you can't achieve.
So you served the government in some capacity for over 30 years. You've got retirements. You make money by talking and writing and that kind of thing. Why on earth would you go back to school for 5 years to go get a PhD now at this point in your life?
Awesome question. And it's a simple answer. Having 33 years in the trenches like I did and serving, and some people would say it was because I wasn't good at any one thing in the FBI. That's why I did so many different things. And they might be right about that.
Yeah.
But serving in so many different capacities as a tactical team leader, a member of HRT, a supervisor, a boss, a diplomat over in Mexico City, undercover, all those different things. Look, I've got the practitioner chops down well. So when the debate comes about policing and law enforcement matters, no one's going to question me, because in law enforcement, especially in the FBI, but in law enforcement, you may not know me, but you know a guy who knows a gal who knows me, or a gal who knows a guy who knows a guy, because it's a close-knit fraternity. So I'm comfortable that humbly speaking, I've got the practitioner chops. I want the theoretical chops.
Yeah.
Because when you're debating things that are so polarizing today, like policing methodologies, whether it's CompStat, broken windows policing theory, stop, question, and frisk, when you're debating those things, it's one thing to go, I've been in the trenches, I've done it. It's another thing to go, hey, I've studied it and I've got these thoughts. When you put those two things together, it's the wonder twin powers activate, and that's where I want to get to. So is it a grind? Absolutely. Does my wife sometimes want to kick me out of the house because everybody's got to be quiet and I've got this one corner of the house and I'm trying to do this? And do I sometimes think, why am I doing this at 55?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. But I know on the other end of this, it is going to pay dividends. When I say pay dividends, not financially, I'm talking about being able to defend a profession that I love by balancing theory with practitioner and doing it that way.
Yeah, you're right. There's a magic with that when you're versed in the peer-reviewed literature and you're able to talk not only about because here's what none of those folks that write those articles have. None of those guys have significant badge time, if they've got any. Maybe they go do research somewhere hard for 3 months or 6 months or maybe even just a year. But when you've done it over and over again, when you've had the time after time, the decisions and the complexity, and you've lived in it. Yeah, man. As a practitioner, my buddy Rich gave me a PhD in the field. He's like, you know this work out in the conflict zones, gathering information and transmitting it back. He's like, nobody's better at this than you are. Like you are a peer at the highest level. That is such a rare thing. But when I go to Stanford to go interview somebody, I'm just some podcast guy, not a person that has any credentials. The bona fides that come with that PhD and that ground truth, it's powerful.
Brother, I got to tell you, man, when you talk about, and I can say this because I'm in academia now. I mean, I teach undergraduates. I have a master's. I'm a year or so out from my doctorate. But when you want to talk about a cloistered, closed-in, nose in the air type of society, you are talking about academia. It is all about titles. Yeah. It's all about where you've been published, what peer-reviewed articles in journals you've been published in. You are 100% right. Look, I'm as you can tell, and as your listeners can probably tell after listening to me for 2 seconds, I'm a knuckle dragger. I'm not going to pretend ever that I'm some wickedly smart guy. Getting a doctorate, getting a PhD, Here's the ticket to it. It's the same ticket to anything else. You can't quit. It has nothing to do with me being smarter. I've talked to PhDs that are way smarter than I am, and I've talked to PhDs that I don't know how they graduated from high school. It's not about being smarter than people. It's about, I'm going to finish this. And then once you're done, you got something nobody can take away from you. And like I said, for me, especially now being a member of the board of directors of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, whose goal and mission is to defend the profession and defend cops that are involved in officer-involved shootings, the righteous cops, the honorable ones. We defend them and help them out financially. I want to be in a position where I can talk about it from an academic perspective, and you can't do that until you have a doctorate behind your name.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your work in that with the fund. And yeah, I understand the PhD thing. It's something that calls to me, but I haven't been able to make sense of how to get it done in a way that just didn't ruin my life for the next 5 years, you know? But
I can't look, and don't look to me to tell you it wouldn't ruin your life for the next 5 years, because it will. But all I'm saying is I've talked to people that have gotten to the other side of it, and they say it's worth it. And that's what I'm clinging to, like grim death.
Yeah. Well, you're like my big brother with this thing. So I may not follow your lead, but I'm definitely, I always have to consider, just because the kind of work that we've done. I mean, I've got 1,000 combat missions outside the wire, you know, but when I speak, no one knows me because all my friends were warlords, you know?
Right.
That was my job. Anyhow, let's get to the LDF and talk about that a little bit, because as a guy that's been in court and got in trouble for something dumb that didn't even matter, part of the problem for me was I was poor. I didn't have any money. And so the state has all the money at once. And as a veteran, the county was going to deny me my veteran diversion thing. And I had a public defender, but she was so overwhelmed. She never really she didn't even show up to my last court date, you know?
Yeah.
Like my defender became the person sitting in the chair like, oh, okay, I'll handle it today. That is no way to be represented. And mine was over a stupid thing in a bar that, you know, didn't even count ultimately. You're talking about cops making a call on the line in the most challenging times. It's enormously difficult, and it can quickly become political and get out of the hands, and that cop can be screwed just because, you know, they made a call that anybody else wouldn't have made. Probably was not a good decision to make in that moment a lot of those times.
So let's look at the law enforcement profession writ large, and I think that there are just under 1 million sworn law enforcement officers in this country. And I think that the people that are active duty law enforcement make up less than 0.5%, like 0.04% of our wonderful country. I mean, these are special people that are called to this. Now, the purpose of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, the LDF, is partly educational and partly benevolent, meaning we want to help the public understand what it takes to be a police officer. And, you know, everybody wants to watch the video afterwards from the officer's body cam and say, well, in that situation, I would have done this. And you're like, but wait a minute, we just slowed it down to, you know, 1/16 of the speed.
Yeah.
And you're doing this after the fact when you know the outcome. That police officer was doing this in a low light condition with he's operating in a vacuum. I mean, police officers respond to a domestic shooting or pull over a car on the side of Route 66 for a broken taillight. When they're walking up on that car, they're in an information vacuum. And so reaction and having to respond to somebody being the aggressor, and you know from the military, action beats reaction every single time. So our job in the LELDF.
Let me throw another factor into that too, because it's important. Every time you go out for a shift, you're briefed. You've been constantly briefed on watch out for the guy in the white van. Watch out for that guy in the blue car. There's a guy running around town raping girls. He sometimes, you know, and so you come up, you may be describing a car that could be the car, that could be the guy that's doing all of this. And so now you go from a regular traffic stop to an extremely tense one, you know? And so I wanted to throw that in because you see the video, but you don't hear the briefing before.
Right. And I think that's the case, is that, you know, we look at these things, and again, we look at them with 20/20 hindsight.
Yeah.
And it's so unfair. You know, I think it was 1989, the Supreme Court made a decision in a case called Graham versus Connor. And what the case said is we have to judge officers when it comes to use of force, right? We have to judge them on the objective reasonableness standard, which means what should an experienced police officer have done in that circumstance? Was that the right thing to do to pull their weapon? Was that the right thing to use a taser? Was that the right thing to strike somebody with an ass baton? Was that the right thing to take a life, which people think for cops is just like, oh, got up this morning, I took a life. It's a huge life, not life changing. It is a life altering type of construct to be in. So what the organization, the LELDF, tries to do, it's been around since 1994, so just celebrated 25 years recently of being in existence, is look at particular cases where police officers are charged with a crime, whether they're charged with manslaughter, or they're charged with brutality, or they're charged with something that is unfair. And we do this on a case-by-case basis. So, look, let's understand. You understand this from the military. I understand it from law enforcement. There are bad apples out there, and there are people that should never wear the badge, and their conduct shouldn't be papered over. And when it comes to light, we should condemn them. And if it's right, they should be fired. And if it's criminal, they should face prosecution. But the vast majority of good cops out there that you alluded to this at the top of this little segment, that during these trying times right now, under this different microscope, this post-Ferguson, post-2014 microscope, these officers need support. And that support can be financial, that support can be social media or public affairs wise, and that's what we're looking to do.
Yeah. And I will say for the combat experienced cops out there, I have a line. If you cross that line, I have to act decisively, and I always say, like, the scale goes from 1 to 10, but when I respond at a 36. Like, it's over, it's decisive. If you put your hands in my car to come after my gun, you're well inside my line, and now you intend to harm me and the people around there, and I'm not going to be the guy dragged off the TV getting their neck cut. I'm just not going to do it. And so you have to understand the mindset of folks that have been in these kind of situations. They've been in life and death situations. A lot of folks have who are law enforcement. And you develop these things. And, like, this is inside the zone. And as a guy who's been an operator on the ground, they get to have that. They get to have that self-preservation. That's why when I get pulled over, I want that officer to know, hey, I'm not a problem. You're going to go home tonight after this call. That's the first thing I want to do is we'll figure everything else out after. That's all minor because I'm not doing anything wrong here. Maybe I'm going to get a ticket, maybe I'm not, but you're going to go home,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important. I think you kind of nailed it there. I mean, because there are a lot of folks that are coming back, that are transitioning out of the military, transitioning out of, special operations, and guys that have done amazing things overseas. Important consideration, law enforcement needs those skills. And obviously that warrior ethos that comes from people that have served our country and been in harm's way, especially in a military where there's no conscription. So you're doing it by volunteering to do it, which says a lot about people. Now, the other thing is on the law enforcement side, when we're over in the sandbox, when you're over in a combat zone, you don't have to account for every round. You can't be indiscriminate. Yes, you can't shoot civilians. Yes, you can be tried for war crimes. But inside these United States, you have to account for every single round. And, it's important. Use of force continuum. It's like you can only go one level over what the bad guy does. So if the bad guy does something that's not a threat to your life, we can't immediately go to taking life. We've got to go, okay, I've got to subdue him in a different way. Yeah. And that's where it makes it really complicated. And that's why law enforcement, the judgment and discernment, it is such a tough job. And people think, anybody can do it. But really, they're a special breed, the folks that are still out there in the front lines doing it now.
Hey, I want to give you a chance to plug your stuff. Let everybody know where they can find you or how they take your class at St. John's.
Well, I tell you, I took a little break this semester, so I didn't teach. But normally at St. John's, I teach undergraduates in American military history between 1917 and 2003, which is essentially World War I to the war in Iraq. I teach organizational leadership. I teach a number of different homeland security and criminal justice courses. So I'm not teaching this semester, hoping to start back up in the fall again. But anybody that's looking to go to St. John's, I'd love to have you in class. And then really beyond that, I just like doing this, whether it's you referred to some of my columns. I write for CNN Opinion and I write for the Washington Examiner primarily, but I also give columns to other places, but those are the two main places. And then I'm on social media like everybody else. You can follow me at James A. Gagliano, Gagliano. You can find me on Instagram under the same. You can find me on Facebook. I have a public page. I love to communicate with people. As long as folks are respectful, as long as folks aren't trolls or bots, I'll respond back to people. And I love to engage in civil discourse. You know, as I say to people all the time that follow me on Twitter, you're not going to agree with every one of my takes, but you know that they'll be offered honestly. That's the way that I feel. I'm not trying to play an angle or, well, he works for CNN, so he says this, or, well, he's former military since that. No, I give it to you unvarnished. They're my views exclusively. As long as people are civil in their dissent, I love to hear the opposing side.
I love it. Hey, man, thanks for coming on. And yeah, you definitely, I can vouch for that. Everything I saw about you was exactly what you just said. So thanks for coming on the show. Hope to have you back on as soon as we have something else to talk about, which is probably going to be tomorrow. But just thanks again, man. I really appreciate you.
Look forward to it, and I appreciate what you're doing too, because this is the kind of stuff that I love to listen to when I'm on a long commute. Smart conversations between civil people. We don't have to agree on everything, but at the same token, just trying to bring issues to the fore and have an adult discussion about them. So thanks for having me on.